from the Toronto Star. I'm Sabah Itazaz, and this matters. In a weird parallel to the Jim Carrey cult classic, The Mask, the masks we've been wearing, or not wearing, have transformed us, and our lives will never be the same again.
Ooh, somebody stop me!
The mask has become the symbol of all we've been through in this age of the pandemic, from the mask scars on the exhausted faces of frontline workers fighting COVID-19 to a Prime Minister's historic, awkward moment, to countless viral anti-mask rants and rallies. It's been more than a year of learning to live with the reality of the mask, and we might be living with it for some time yet. The Star's Ottawa-based reporter Amy Dempsey has traced the trajectory of Toronto's mask life, and she's here to explain how a piece of cloth became both protection and political. And we also mark the maskiversary of a year since the day Prime Minister Trudeau uttered a word that immortalized him and masks for Canadians. Yeah, you know which one I'm talking about.
Moistly.
Hi, Amy. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
So, it's been a year since the official policy on mandatory masking was implemented. How does it feel living with this extra bit of clothing for a year? Also, I need to ask, how many masks do you have now? Because I started off with just disposable ones because I was in denial, and now I have one to match a number of outfits and occasions.
I probably have 20 or 30 masks in my house. That's for my whole family, my spouse, and our 2 kids. Most of them we don't wear anymore. Some of the ones we got early on in the pandemic were kind of poorly made and fell apart or didn't fit well. I now have a favorite mask. It's a scarf mask that kind of covers my face and neck. It has like adjustable ear straps. I have a black one and one that's sort of like a blush color. I first bought them for my 4-year-old because she was starting kindergarten in Toronto last fall. And when I heard the news in August that she would have to wear a mask all day, I thought, that's not going to happen. But it did happen. She's worn one without complaint since day one. And I think that, for me, demonstrates how stunning our adaptation to masks has been. Something that seemed ridiculous and impossible in August was part of our daily life in September.
Especially how we've seen the younger ones adapt so much quicker, I feel, in many ways, right? So, Amy, there's no more fitting symbol of our adaptation to life in a pandemic through the course of the year than the face mask. And I think you kind of covered that through the experience of Madeline, Mann, who dresses up as a plague doctor on her Instagram. I saw in your piece, which is absurdist and apt at the same time. So tell me more about her.
Madeline Mann is a health anthropologist and a lecturer at the University of Toronto, Mississauga. So for her research, she's kind of been immersed in the history of infectious disease. So when the pandemic happened, it was like she was living through suddenly what she had been studying in history for her whole career. And in the past, when she taught classes on infectious disease, she used her theater background to entertain her students by dressing up in period costumes. And one of the costumes, when she taught about the plague, she dressed up as a 17th century plague doctor. So long black gown, hat, and a beaked mask, kind of like a bird-like mask that would have, in plague times, held aromatic herbs, which were believed to ward off infection. So when the pandemic hit and she was in lockdown and working from home, she started to think, what would a plague doctor do in isolation? And she started this really interesting Instagram account, Plague Doctor Time, documenting the life of a plague doctor, encouraging creative pursuits.
So also raising awareness at the same time and pointing to the historic context as well. This is not the first time we've had to deal with masks and pandemics in our history.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it was pretty successful, the account.
Yeah, I saw that. It was fascinating. Thank you so much for pointing that out for me in your piece. So let's talk a little bit about the messaging around masks and how you think that's changed through the course of the pandemic. A year ago, ordinary citizens were told not to wear masks. We had a shortage which threatened the safety of healthcare workers, and now masks are everywhere. So let's talk a little bit about how the government and the international health organizations kind of worked around the messaging of this.
So early on in March of last year, everyone, citizens, ordinary citizens who weren't healthcare workers, were told not to wear them. because of the global shortage. But we weren't just told don't wear masks because we need them for healthcare workers. We were told by different health authorities, including the WHO, the World Health Organization, that there wasn't evidence to suggest masks prevented the spread of COVID-19 in the general public.
What we worry about is actually the potential negative aspects of wearing masks, where people are not protecting their eyes or, other aspects of where the virus could enter your body. And that gives you a full sense of confidence. But also, it increases the touching of your face, if you think about it. If you've got a mask around your face, sometimes you can't help it because you're just touching parts of your face.
So the mixed messaging would kind of come back to haunt public health officials, because when they shifted toward recommended mask wearing, some people viewed the change with suspicion, and anti-maskers ended up using old videos and recommendations on the internet to support their inaccurate arguments. But it was true at the time that there was a huge global shortage. Masks were needed for healthcare workers. And as evidence evolved, that is when public health officials started shifting the messaging in April.
Right. And as we grappled with the tragedy of COVID-19, like you mentioned, the conversation of masks was also around the frontline health workers risking themselves, the shortage of PPE. And that's when we heard talk about mask lines, kind of like battle scars that health workers have after hours of wearing the mask. Did masks, in a way, also become a symbol of resistance in our fight against the pandemic at that point?
I have worked 75 of the last 77 days. It feels impossible to keep up. What if I get my kids sick or my parents? What if that's me next week?
Yeah, I remember that time when masks were worn mostly by healthcare workers, and they were sort of a badge of honor in a way, and they were a really new thing for us. I think, a symbol of resistance, a symbol of solidarity over time, once a lot of people started wearing them. Yeah, resistance makes sense to me.
And following through on that timeline, when and how did Canada officially change its mind on masks as public policy?
So Canada's shift toward mask wearing started on April 6th. That was when our Chief Public Health Officer, Dr. Theresa Tam, said that it wasn't a recommendation. It was more of a change to permissive language. So she said masks were an additional measure that you can take to prevent others, that you can take. So it wasn't one that you had to take or even that was recommended. It was just masks are now something that the government was acknowledging that we could do on public transit or in grocery stores. But there was no formal recommendation yet.
And yet that moment will forever be etched in our memory, thanks to Prime Minister Trudeau, who immortalized it for us.
Understanding of what Dr. Tam explained yesterday is that if people want to wear a mask, that is okay. It protects others more than it protects you, because it prevents you from breathing or speaking moistly on them. Oh, what a terrible image.
And do you remember how that kind of became the theme of Canada's mask policy for a while? I've heard a lot of remixes around that particular phrase.
If people want to wear a mask, that is okay. These are the things we know that prevents you from speaking moistly. Speaking moistly. Keep 2 meters apart. Speaking moistly.
I think I actually got my first mask right around the time that song came out. Mm-hmm. It was maybe an awkward moment for our Prime Minister, but good PR for the mask, I think.
We'll be right back. When did masks finally become mainstream or officially sort of mandatory, or were people still kind of weirded out about them for a while?
So there was a sort of, you probably remember it, we all remember it, the time in April and early to mid-May when in Canada, at least, masks were not recommended yet, but they had been acknowledged as something we could do if we chose to. I remember April as a very strange month because some people, as soon as Dr. Tam said that we could wear masks, started wearing them and with enthusiasm. And so some people jumped on the mask train right away, and others were more skeptical or maybe couldn't find one, or were still thinking, wait, aren't we not supposed to wear masks? It was a confusing time. And as weeks went on and more people started wearing masks, I think there was a shift, and the people not wearing masks began to stand out. There was some judgment around that. Some people viewed them as not following guidance or as selfish. So there was a lot of anxiety in that time. If you remember being in a grocery store and noticing who was wearing masks and who wasn't, it was a weird feeling until May 21st, when the government of Canada formally recommended that we wear masks.
Today, City Council will consider a report from Dr. Eileen de Villa to effectively make it mandatory for people to wear masks or face coverings inside businesses or public facilities.
Yes, I remember there was some hostility there as well. I remember standing in a line at a convenience store and certain looks being directed at an individual who wasn't wearing one. It was quite confusing until, like you said, some clear messaging came out around that. But then we also saw masks become a dividing line on the pandemic as well.
It's a shadow government that's doing it.
What shadow government?
You don't know about the shadow government?
No.
Okay, you haven't heard of the Illuminati?
Why are you wearing a mask? What are you afraid of? Because you're harming your health.
How am I harming my health?
Wearing a mask is unhealthy.
A subject of polarization. How did this become a cultural battleground in North America? Why do you think there was such resistance? I'm talking about the anti-maskers movement, which started off in the US, but we have one sort of here as well.
Well, I think some people value freedom, or their idea of what freedom is, above all else. It didn't help that we had a president of the United States who mocked people for wearing masks and who expressed skepticism about their effectiveness.
I just don't want to wear one myself. It's a recommendation. They recommend it. I'm feeling good. I just don't want to be somehow sitting in the Oval Office wearing a face mask as I greet presidents, prime ministers, dictators, kings, queens. I don't see it for myself. Maybe I'll change my mind.
The one thing that stands out for me, though, most Canadians support mask wearing. Even back in September, in one poll, 83% said they supported mask mandates in indoor public spaces. It's probably more now. Madeline, the anthropologist, told me that she found it heartening to see that so many people, beginning in late May and into the summer, were willing to endure the minor inconvenience of a mask for the greater good. And I feel the same way. We have the anti-maskers, but for the most part, people are wearing masks, not because it's fun necessarily, but because it's necessary.
And we saw some pioneers of what I'm calling the mask age emerge as well. You're talking about Madeline Mann. You also mentioned Lloyd in your reporting. Can you tell me more about that? And how did her masks end up on John Tory and the Raptors?
Nadia Lloyd is a Toronto artist and designer who was out of work last year when the pandemic hit and we went into first lockdown. So she started making masks, and she had this line of cushion covers that she designed. And she wasn't selling any cushions at that time. So she just started cutting them all up and making masks. She made a couple for her and her 9-year-old son. And when she posted pictures online, she got all these requests from healthcare workers who were desperate for masks and who asked her how they could get one. So she started donating masks to healthcare workers, about 500 of them over the course of a couple of months. And eventually, when our shortage wasn't as big of a deal anymore, when we moved into recommended mask wearing, she started making them and selling them, started a business online. And she designed this great rainbow mask for Toronto Pride Month, and then got a message from the mayor's office saying he wanted to buy one. So he did. He went to her condo personally to pick it up. She was shocked to see him there. And he started wearing it all over town, and her masks got pretty popular. Then she designed one with her son. She designed a Black Lives Matter mask. It was a fist rising up behind the Toronto skyline. She did this in response to the impact that the death of George Floyd had on her as a biracial woman, and a conversation she had with her son about it and about racism. So when she saw a news story about the Raptors arriving at the NBA bubble in July with Black Lives Matter written on their bus, she wanted to send her masks to the Raptors. So she put out a message on Facebook asking if anybody had a connection. And she ended up getting contacted by Roberta Nurse, the wife of Nick Nurse, the coach of the Raptors. And fast forward a few days later, or a few weeks later, Nick Nurse, the coach, and Fred Van Fleet wore her masks on a televised news conference. And that was huge for her. It pretty much changed her life and her business.
That's awesome. And it just also brings forth this sort of politicization or political aspect around the mask. And in this case, masks seem to have become a political symbol in the background of the refueling of the BLM movement and the racial reckonings that followed as well, right?
Yeah. Nadia and her son hoped it would be a conversation starter for people. And they actually donated $5 from each mask to Black Lives Matter Toronto, which ended up amounting to like $7,000.
Let's come to the social aspects a little bit. How has the mask changed our social cues and the way we interact with others?
Well, one example of this is I spoke to Valerie Francis, a grocery store worker in Toronto, about her experience wearing a mask all day, every day at work. I wanted to write about a grocery store worker in this mask story because I thought that of all the places in 2020 to observe social dynamics, grocery stores were really an interesting place. They're a place where pretty much everyone had to go at a time of high anxiety and suspicion. And one of Valerie's problems wearing the mask all day was that she's very soft-spoken and people had a hard time hearing her, especially when she had to stand behind the plexiglass at the cash as well. Mask plus plexiglass, it takes away the ability to have that kind of small talk that we're used to having. And it just makes everything a little bit harder and more awkward. So grocery store workers have had to take a lot of crap from people this year. We've seen videos of anti-maskers yelling at workers. Valerie hasn't had any extreme experiences like that, but in tense moments, she told me that she tries to remember that with the mask on, it's just really hard to know how people are feeling and what their intentions are. And it's hard to tell if they're angry or sad or just tired. You don't know what's going on behind the mask and what's going on in their lives.
Yeah, I can relate to that in the sense that I never really knew how difficult it was to place a coffee order with the plexi and the mask on. And I think we've just kind of started reverting more on like our body language and cues as opposed to you can't tell what's going on behind somebody's mask, right?
Yeah, I'm a small talk person and I have just failed so many times at trying to make small talk with grocery store workers this year because every time it's like, what? What did you say? Oh, sorry, nothing. You try to repeat it and then you sort of have to laugh and give up.
I just try to smile extra hard. Maybe my eyes will be like smizing and people can tell. But yeah, it's been a challenge. So, Amy, there's also been a shift in perceptions over time. The mask during COVID-19 began to be, for some people, be associated with freedom in a way. Freedom for the immunocompromised or the sick and the vulnerable to be able to come out knowing that they're being kept safe by others. Are we now beginning to see the mask as a mark of courtesy and trust, sort of like washing your hands before dinner? Is this mask putting on being seen as a friendly gesture now?
Yeah, I wonder. I kind of think of it as a symbol of solidarity and maybe courtesy too. I feel like they've also just come to represent the idea of, I respect science and public health guidelines. I think early on, especially, the whole mask wearing thing came with a little bit of high and mightiness, like you put on a mask because when you put on a mask, you are almost telling the world, I believe in science. I believe in following public health guidelines and doing what I can to protect others and to protect myself and my family.
Meanwhile, since then, I haven't really seen a single gathering or a special moment without seeing masks on people anymore. There are even Indian soaps and shows on Netflix that have characters wearing masks. How is our culture shifting around this? It seems like masks are now woven into the fabric of society, and I did intend that pun.
Yeah, well, we now have bridal masks that are made to match wedding gowns. We have diamond-studded designer masks. I won't be wearing them, but someone might. I prefer just, a plain black mask myself. And, everywhere I go online, I get ads for masks. Every store that exists, you can find a mask in it, like everything from Old Navy to, my laundromat down the street has masks everywhere, even at the checkout at Shoppers Drug Mart or any grocery store. They're everywhere.
There are couture lines for masks, believe me. I know you can get masks for any purpose, for exercise, for chilling out, for a walk. So yeah, I feel like there has been some kind of shift. And this is not unprecedented. For example, in other countries like Japan or South Korea, residents might actually get dirty looks if they hop on a subway with a sniffle or sneeze and they don't have a mask. So these countries kind of shifted their cultures after issues with pollutions or epidemics or pandemics. Do you think that's changed for the West as well? Could masks in the future become as common as t-shirts? How are we going to be looking back at this?
Yeah, other countries were way ahead of us in adopting masks. They've been doing it as a symbol of courtesy or as a sign of courtesy for years. Nadia Lloyd, the mask maker, did a survey of her clients and fans asking how many people would continue to wear masks for the long term. And a lot said they would. It was more than half. But I think right now, while we're in it, it's hard to know what our mindset will be. I don't think the answers people give now would necessarily be the answers they'd give a year from now, because we know how quickly everything has changed and how feelings and thoughts we had 2 months ago seem so silly in retrospect. For me personally, I think I will continue to wear a mask in future in public if I have a cold to protect others. But other than that, I will probably drop them when it's time, if we ever get to zero or if we ever get somewhere to a comfortable place, I'll probably drop them. But I don't think it'll be unusual or weird to see people with masks on in malls or in the subway anymore. I don't even think we'll notice or bat an eye when we see that in the future.
Thank you so much for your time and your insight, Amy. And I'm really glad we were having this conversation on Zoom and we could see each other's faces and not have the mask.
Me too. Thanks.
That was the Star's Ottawa-based reporter, Amy Dempsey. That's it for today. Thanks so much for listening. This Matters is hosted and produced by me, Sabai Tazaz, Adrian Chung, and Raju Mudhar. Produced and mixed by Sean Pattenden, and our director of programming is JP Fozo. Our show theme music is by So Called, and our episode music is by Mike DeAngelis. We want to hear what stories matter to you. Please send us comments, questions, or ideas to thismatters@thestar.ca. Please consider supporting the journalism the Toronto Star newsroom does at thestar.com. And don't forget to subscribe to This Matters on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Let's talk soon.